Well, welcome to Melrose. We're halfway up the Virginia Road, which is 22 kilometres west of Harden. You can see behind us the homestead. Mandy and I arrived there in 1974, which didn't seem that long ago, but when you look around the trees, it is quite a long time ago. The hills on the horizon are 850 metres, and then right through in the very back is the high peak at the back is 1300 metres. Our main plantings are in this lower area, and we do have a logging road which we've started to use. Started farming with 3,600 odd hectares, and now with the property next door we're farming 6,500 hectares, and on that we're running 9,000 sheep, 600 cattle and 300 deer. We also have a hunting operation which provides a bit of outside income, and we have our forestry which is roughly 250 hectares. Of that, Mandy and I retain the cutting rights on 200 hectares approximately. The children have grouped together and planted 30 hectares, and we are now into an annual harvest from our forests, which is what we had. It's one of the purposes for planting originally. We're currently standing in a block that was planted in 1977. We planted it ourselves. Mandy actually did a lot of the low pruning, and it goes to show that it's quite possible to grow a good crop in your own lifetime, which is a real bonus for being a forester in New Zealand. Well, there are three reasons for our forestry planting. One of them is a risk management, because our biggest problem up here is snow and affecting our stock, and so saw the forestry, once we got into an annual cut, as a income source that should not be affected by snow. What's another income source that's not affected by any livestock disease or whatever? Second reason is that biologically it's a sensible thing to do. We are only running 1.5 stock units to the hectare, and the forestry or trees are actually using the land a lot better than what grass does, because they can actually tap into the subsoil, extract moisture and nutrients that grass don't. And the third reason was inheritance and succession planning. Yeah, well, this is one of my oldest agroforestry block. It was an easy contour block near the house, and one of the reasons for planting it was having sharing shelter close to the house. What we did was plant double rows and along this particular aspect, which is east facing, now 17 metres between double rows. All we did was prune it. First grazing actually took place when I was only 18 months old, and so some of the trees which were a bit slow to get away did actually get grazed out, but it was planted at around about 500 stems per hectare. At age 24 I came in with a radiata, and we harvested 1,000 tonnes, or almost 1,100 tonnes out of 11 hectares, so that was around about 100 tonnes to the hectare, and we netted a bit over $10 a tonne for that. So that was the first thinning it had had. The other thing that has been quite impressive with this has been the grass growth. We've never really lost the grass. At age 24 it was starting to thin out in places, but since we've done the production thin, it's come back again, and it's not only just the fact that it's grass, but it's actually quality grass. There's quite a lot of clover in amongst it. And the other really interesting thing is the shape of the trees. Almost everywhere else in New Zealand, a regime like this, the branches on the trees would be as big as the stem of the trees. It seems to be a unique combination of our climate, soil. In the background are a stand of Douglas fir planted in 1994, so they're just coming up to 20 years old. They haven't been touched yet, but this winter we'll probably do a thinning. One thing I would sort of emphasise, anyone thinking of planting or have young trees, the priority always should be thinning rather than pruning or anything else, because a large diameter log is always easier to sell than a small diameter log. So what we have in the background here is our first logging. Almost 3 years ago now, our first clear fell. It was a block that we planted in 1975, and you can see there's some Douglas fir left in the middle. We planted either side of that. There's about 2.7 hectares. Mandy and I planted it over about a fortnight, and that was felled in 2011, and we netted $65,000 from 2.7 hectares. We have since replanted it, and instead of taking a fortnight to plant it, we got contractors in and they planted the whole lot in 2 hours with 14 men. The advantage of that is that one, the trees were fresh out of the nursery, so they'd only been lifted the day before, and the second one is that they were experienced planters, so they were well planted. The actual costs and returns, if you look at it in a little more detail, I think it cost us about $1,030 or $50 a hectare to replant, and that's including trees, planting and spraying, and the whole regime with the pruning and thinning we estimate will be another $2,500 a hectare probably. As I say, the total return per hectare was over $25,000 per hectare. Just to the left of that is the block that we harvested last year. That didn't give us quite as high a return because it had been thinned a bit harder. There wasn't the same volume per hectare. The original block we had over 600 tonnes per hectare. This other area was only 530 tonnes per hectare, but it still returned us $20,000 a hectare. Okay, so this is a covered sheep yards, reasonably recent addition, and most of the wood in here was homegrown. A lot of macrocarpa up in the roof. These poles are radiata that my father planted, so they're probably around about 60 odd years old. And the railings, we've used macrocarpa, radiata. I didn't have much Douglas fir on hand, but I could have used that. And also Eucalyptus delicatensis we've used in the gate over in the background there. So we found that quite useful for internal use. It hasn't been treated.
Fortunately, when I came here in 1974, I did have a background in planting. My mother was a mad key gardener and tree planter, so when Dugald started planting trees every year, it wasn't too much of a surprise to me, especially as he had a forestry degree. I've sort of been more interested in the amenity and shelter planting, and I'd just like to emphasise how important it is to get that initial establishment correct. We probably didn't always do it right in the early days when we were busy with young children and some things didn't get sprayed, but I've just learned that the survival is so much better with spraying, and of course fencing is very important. I can't stress how well the fences have to be made, because there's always long grass in a fenced off area and stock are always keen to get in there. I've done a lot of native planting around ponds and starting to do it in shelter belts. And it is very expensive when you're buying them from a nursery, so if any of you are green-fingered, I would suggest seeds. I think cabbage trees, every seed germinates, or else Hebe's cuttings are really easy. Kauais are always difficult, but that's the thought. I've learnt so much through the Farm Forestry Association and attending annual conferences. Have always been great fun, made lots of great friends, but getting out onto other people's properties and seeing what they're doing and coming home and just being really inspired to do something more for yourself, and we've had a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah, and just all the practical advice that you get from a farm forestry field day and farm forestry members. So we need more young members in the Farm Forestry Association.
Definitely.
Yeah.